Hi. It has been a long, long time since Grammy recorded Storytime. I don't know who's out there watching it. Hudson, Brooks, Knox, are you guys watching Storytime? What about Simon and Jackson? Are you watching Storytime? I do know that Annabelle watches Storytime. So, I'm sorry, Grammy has been dropping the ball lately and not doing story time. And I don't know if I've read this book yet. The Best Nest. I don't think I have. I didn't see it, but it might have been on one of our earlier ones. But anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. The Best Nest. There's a daddy bird and a mama bird. She doesn't look very happy. All right. Somebody scribbled in this book. Wow. Mr. Bird was happy. He was so happy that he had to sing. This was Mr. Bird's song. I love my house, I love my nest. In all the world, my nest is best. Then Mrs. Bird came out of the house. It's not the best nest, she said. It's all scribbled. I'm tired of this old place, said Mrs. Bird. I hate it. Let's look for a new place right now. She wants a new house. Don't we all? So they left the old place to look for a new one. This place looks nice, said Mr. Bird. Let's move in here. That little hole right there. But somebody else had already moved in. So they looked at another house. This one looks nice, said Mr. Bird, and there's nobody in it. It's an old shoe. Does that make a good house? You're wrong, said Mrs. Bird. This house belongs to a foot. So they went on looking. I like this one, said Mr. Bird. It has a pretty red flag on the roof. Look at that. Does that look like a good house? I've always wanted a house with a red flag, said Mrs. Bird. Maybe this place will be all right. Uh-oh, it's a mailbox. But it was not all right. I guess I made a mistake, said Mr. Bird. You make too many mistakes, said Mrs. Bird. I'm going to pick the next house. Look at all that scribbling. Who did that? Oh, gosh. And here it is, right here. It's a bell tower. It's a big tower, and they want to put their nest in there. They flew in, and they looked around. Isn't it too big? Said Mr. Bird. I like this big place, said Mrs. Bird. This is the place to build our new house. They went right to work. They needed many things to build their nest. First, they got some hay. Then they got some straws. They took the straw right out of her drink. And some broom straws. And some sweater string. Look at that. They're taking the string right off his sweater. They got some stocking string. Taking the string off the socks. They got some mattress stuffing. They got some horse hair. They're stealing the horsey's hair. They got some man hair. Can't tell because someone scribbled his face. They're taking his hair. Soon they had all the hay and the straw and the string and the stuffing and all the horsehair and all the man hair that they could carry. And they took it all the way back to build their nest. Look at all that stuff they're carrying in their mouth. They're going to build their nest. Mr. and Mrs. Bird worked very hard, and it took them the rest of the morning to finish their nest. Look at that, their nest is all done. This nest is really best, said Mrs. Bird. I want to stay here forever. Do you know what this is? That's a bell. Mr. Bird was very happy too. So he flew to the top of the house and he sang his song again. I love our house. I love our nest. In all the world, our nest is best. He was so happy singing that he didn't see a man, Mr. Parker, coming down the road. Here comes Mr. Parker. Every day at 12 o'clock, Mr. Parker came to the church. Mr. Parker came to pull the rope. And the rope went up to the bird's new nest. The rope rang the big bell right under the nest. Bong, bong, bong. Woo, scared Mrs. Bird right out of her nest. Mrs. Bird got out of there and as fast as she could fly away. Bong, 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 bong. Get me out of here. When Mr. Bird came in, all he could see was a mess. Look, their nest is all messy. And the hay and string and stuffing and horsehair and man hair and straws. Where was Mrs. Bird? Look at that. He's in shock. I will look for her until I find her, said Mr. Bird. He looked high and he looked low. He looked everywhere for Mrs. Bird. Do you see Mrs. Bird anywhere? Is she in the house? No. I don't know where she is. He looked down into a chimney, but Mrs. Bird was not there. He looked down into the water barrel, but Mrs. Bird was not there. Where is Mrs. Bird? He saw a big fat cat, and there was a big fat smile on the big fat cat's face. There was some pretty brown feathers near the fat cat's mouth. Oh no, I hope the cat didn't eat Mrs. Bird. Mr. Bird began to cry. Oh dear, he cried, this big fat cat has eaten Mrs. Bird. Mr. Bird flew off. I'll never see Mrs. Bird again, he cried. It was getting dark, and it began to rain, and it rained harder and harder. Mr. Bird could not see where he was going. Oh, he's so sad. Then crash! Mr. Bird bumped into something. It was his old house. That old house that Mrs. Bird hated. I'll go inside, said Mr. Bird, and I'll rest. And when the rain stops, I'll look for Mrs. Bird. Mr. Bird went in, and there was Mrs. Bird, sitting there, singing, I love my house, I love my nest. In all the world, my nest is best. "You're here?" gasped Mr. Bird. "I thought you hated this old nest." Mrs. Bird smiled. "I used to hate it," she said. "But a mother bird can change her mind. You see, there's no nest like an old nest for a brand new bird." They're going to have a baby bird. And when the egg popped open, the new bird thought so too. Look, baby bird. The moral of the story is just be happy with the house that you have. It's pretty funny. I hope you have a great day. And Grammy will really try to be more consistent on the whole story time thing. We love you.